How to boil a frog. Step 1. Find a pot. 5 quarts would be best, 3 would do, and fill it with cool water. Step 2. Put the frog in the pot. Step 3. Turn the stove to low heat and gradually increase the heat. Step 4. Turn the heat to maximum. Now, that doesn't really actually work in real life. It's an analogy, or a metaphor rather, but it's appropriate. We are the frog. The saying goes that if you throw a frog into boiling water, it'll immediately jump out because it feels the temperature difference between its surroundings and itself. But if you slowly increase the pressure, the temperature, on the frog, it won't know any better. It'll slowly let itself cook to death. You could be the frog. Our guest today is going to teach us how to jump out of that boiling pot.
You are a warrior.
321 status.
What kind of vehicle is it?
You are the very best your nation has to offer.
911.
Multiple shots fired.
They're asking you to lead.
5. We need a Bearcat.
It's up to us.
So 133. I need somebody that's got a visual on where the shooter is.
You must be sound in mind, body, and spirit.
42, where's the officer down? I have a rescue helicopter that wants to land and help.
This is the podcast that will make you the one.
Copy running eastbound.
The one that will bring everyone back.
Trouble, we have shot fired.
Give me backup now.
Because no one else is coming.
We're going to have an officer shot. 100 block of East Street.
Suspect is down. Suspect is down.
This is The Squad Room.
Hello everyone, welcome to The Squad Room. I'm your host, Garrett Slaw. I'm an active duty patrol sergeant in Southern California for a sheriff's office, and this show is about how we as modern warriors can achieve our full potential and fulfill our purpose as our first responder. The show is about being a better modern warrior, and how can we be the leader this world needs us to be, and how do we be the best version of ourselves possible every day. You must understand that as a first responder, you are a leader. It's my firm belief that we're the absolute best our nations have to offer, and that we must burden ourselves with leading others if we are to save our countries. We are our nation's modern warriors. Before we get to the interview, I want to remind you that you can get more information on this episode, including show notes and links to the show's information for our guest today, by going to thesquadroom.net. You can also subscribe on iTunes and Stitcher if you're new to the show, and follow me on Instagram and Twitter at The Squad Room. Now, since my last episode came out, I have I've performed and released a TED Talk. It was something that was always on my bucket list of things to do. If you follow me on socials or my email list, which you can sign up for by going to thesquadroom.net, you may have heard of me talking about this a little bit, but this is where I'm going to enlist your help, and a request for help there is to watch that episode or watch that talk, and if you like the message of it, which is essentially the idea of being the one, but kind of civilianized for people who don't listen to the show frequently, and share that talk with someone else. Share it with a partner, share it with a boss, someone in command, someone who could get some value out of it, but maybe also we could start to affect some real change. You can go to YouTube and just type in Garrett Slaw TEDx Talk, and it'll pop right up. So, before we get to the guest today, I want to thank our sponsors. First being Hardhead Veterans. It's my belief that any assignment requires access to a high-quality ballistic helmet, whether you're on patrol or responding to an active shooter, a SWAT cup, busting down a door, etc. Hardhead Veterans makes NIJ-compliant helmets for reasonable prices to keep you in the fight. Now, stay tuned later in the show. I'm going to tell you more about how you can get an even better deal from this veteran-owned business that employs active-duty police officers. Also want to thank Blue Line Flex. They're a fitness apparel brand owned and operated by a veteran cop out on the East Coast. Justin, the owner, started Blue Line Flex to create a high-quality apparel company that gives back to police charities. The Blue Line Flex t-shirts have an athletic cut and shape, and they're longer to allow for easier concealed carry. I like them because they stay tucked in under my vest. They also have a line of women's wear, including leggings and insulated protein shakers that I always rave about. Someone even made fun of me on Instagram for raving about their shakers recently because I do it so often. You can check them out at bluelineflex.com or on Instagram at bluelineflex. Both of these organizations do a lot of work with police charities, and they do a lot of giving back. So go out and support them. My guest today, he's a repeat guest. He's back for a second episode. Shaun O'Gorman. Shaun was a police officer in Australia for a long time, and began struggling with PTSD and suicidal thoughts, and came very, very, very close to pulling the trigger. And his last episode with us is fantastic. Please go through the archives to listen to it, because he tells his personal story, and it's pretty intense, and it's amazing. Shaun has then taken it upon himself to make it his calling in life to educate himself about these things and what happened to him, so that he can help cops avoid the same pitfalls that he fell in, and he can help them make their lives better. He's definitely doing that now. He teaches to law enforcement all over Australia, which is where he's from. Hence a bit of a wonky Skype connection at times, and the accent, obviously. But Shaun is an amazing guy, and I always enjoy talking to him. And I'm going to let him tell everything about this. But you're going to learn today how to navigate some of the challenges we face. I talk about some of the challenges I've had, and some of the myths that we tell ourselves about why we need to be stoic and strong in the face of this kind of adversity. It's really about resilience. And we talk about the 5 practical keys to long-term success in this career. And so check him out. Go to thestronglifeproject.com, and Shaun will send you the PDF version of the presentation that we kind of talk about here in the show. So it's thestronglifeproject.com. That's his organization. He has a podcast by the same name, and you can check him out there. So without any more talking from me, here's our episode with Shaun O'Gorman. Shaun O'Gorman, welcome back to the Squadron, buddy.
Thanks, Garrett. Really appreciate it.
Now, for people listening, this is your second time on the show, and they will notice that your accent sounds different than most of the people. It's because you're on the other side of the world. You are currently in Australia, and it's like the next day there. And I say currently, but that's where you've been. For people who haven't heard your last episode, which I will post in the show notes and encourage everyone to go back to, because that gives a longer description of your own journey through the mental health aspects of law enforcement. We'll give everybody just a quick recap of who you are, what you did, and how you got to where what you're doing now.
Sure. So I'm obviously Australian police officer. Started in the police in 1989 here in Queensland, in Australia, and left in 2001, 2002 with PTSD, depression, and battled suicide really badly for many years. And I was in the canine unit for 9 years and the covert surveillance unit for a couple of years. So I did some very hectic first response policing, which I absolutely loved. I was a million miles an hour with it. That's where the PTSD came from. Knew the wheels were falling off, as the terminology I use, but unfortunately didn't have the courage to ask for help. Then I've spent the last 15 or 16 years educating myself on personal development, emotional awareness, every piece of education and information I could find around getting through PTSD and depression. And then it became an obsession in a positive sense. I have an obsessive personality. I'm a full of personality. So in the police, it was 100 miles an hour. Now in this, I'm 100 miles an hour. And then come out the other side now, where in the last 12 months, I've been presenting critical stress training. I've done about 60 of these 2-hour presentations to my old police department, our Australian Federal Police Agency, my state corrections service, so our corrections officers in prison. And so they now very much has become my full-time career, which has been my goal for the last X number of years. And I'm dealing with heaps of police, one-on-one, a number from the States, a few from Canada, or a lot from Australia, that are all dealing with that same stress, etc. So in a 45 seconds, that's sort of the background.
Well, as we were talking right before I hit record, it's been great because the last time I had you on, you walked everybody through your own journey through this and your own path. But then at that time, you wanted to go out there and teach other cops about what you'd learned and help them prevent getting to the spot where you had to get to in order to make a change. And so it's cool to watch over the last year, I think, or so since you've been on, how you've been able to create that. And now you've given, I mean, you're affecting hundreds and hundreds of cops around the world now with this. And,
thanks.
And hopefully we'll add a few more to that here today, because the more we talk about this, I know you agree with this, the more we talk about this and make this less stigmatic, then people are more willing to get help. So I think a lot of it comes down to what you just said about moving 100 miles an hour. And even for those of us who don't move that fast anymore, the going to work and donning and doffing all that gear and the weapons and then coming home and doing it again the next day, that leads to hypervigilance. And that's something you talk about in your presentations. And then the hyper-awareness. For people who are new to this idea in general, can you describe hypervigilance for us?
Sure. It's to me, hypervigilance, hyper-awareness is the very thing that keeps us alive when we're on the street. So as a whether you're an investigator or a detective, a first response officer, if you don't have hypervigilance and hyper-awareness, you're essentially driving down the street with your eyes turned off and your mind turned off and you're not observant. So for you and I, we will be off duty, and every one of your police officers that are listeners, sitting in a cafe with our back to the wall, for instance. You will be driving along the road, looking into every vehicle and assessing what their behaviour and what they're doing, looking where people's hands are. As you walk down the street, if you walk through a shopping mall or a supermarket or wherever there are people congregated, you will always be looking at people's hands, eyes, body language to try and assess whether they're a threat or not. These days in the realms of terrorism, it is, and in Australia, we're as hypervigilant here as you guys in the States, you're looking at every person assessing whether their behaviour is off because of a potential terrorist threat. They're just things that cops do naturally. But the biggest issue, that's fantastic. It keeps you alive at work, and you and I can spend 5 hours swapping stories about how that's kept us alive. But then the issue is when you go home and you don't turn that off, you end up in that state of hyper-adrenal fatigue. You're always in that fight or flight response. And as cops, often I find people I talk to don't realise that they're in that state because it's like that frog in the boiling water. Is that a common sort of analogy for you guys?
Oh, yeah.
Frog in boiling water?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So as a frog in the boiling water, you joined the academy, and whenever you did, an X amount of years later, you've incrementally increased that stress response of adrenal fight or flight to the point where you are operating at 90% of your 100% capacity stressed, but you don't realise because it's taken a period of time to get there. And then that hypervigilance, hyper-awareness just means it's hard for you to slow down, it's hard for you to sleep, it's hard for you to maintain any semblance of normality, in inverted commas, because you're always hyped up. But you're so used to it, it feels normal.
So it's funny as you said that, and I'm thinking, and I'm listening to you talk, I realized, an experience I had earlier this week with my daughter. I have a 10-year-old daughter, and she likes to jump out from behind the corner and scare me, and I can't stand it. And I get all tense, and my shoulders get all wound up, and I've asked her not to do it, but of course she likes to continue doing it because she sees it gets a rise out of Dad. And last week she did the exact same thing, and my wife saw it, and she saw the reaction and the overreaction, and how I kind of physically lurched back, but also how flustered it got me. And the way I explained it to my wife was, it sounds so dramatic, but it's true. It's like, and I was on night shift at the time, and doing that, and I was like, I go through dark buildings and dark corners looking for people who want to hurt me. Or who have the potential to hurt me. And getting surprised is not in my line of things that I find fun to do, because that's what I am through my training and experience, but my department training, I am preconditioned to see the surprise, the person jumping out at you, as a threat.
Absolutely.
And so it's hard to translate that to my 10-year-old daughter, when I, but it was, I was at home and I was on my day off and we were goofing around with the kids or, playing. And it reminded me that hyper awareness, you can't just turn it off when you get off shift.
No, definitely not. And my father, I said last time, my dad was a policeman for 42 years here in Australia, very highly decorated for bravery, very brave guy. And again, we have the Irish Catholic temper and background and a little bit of lunacy, and he certainly is very much that guy. And I had the same thing when I was about 8, came home. He came home on dusk and I was hiding in a garden bed with a friend of mine from 2 houses down. Scared Dad. He lost his mind, blew up, was very unhappy about it. And in hindsight now, obviously an 8-year-old child had no idea. And we'll talk a little bit about how we minimise the impact on our family as we go through this today. And that's one of the things for you. Is that sort of reaction to your daughter. A person who's not a law enforcement officer goes, well, that's not great. To me, I think that's actually a really good reaction from the sense of your officer safety perspective. Mm-hmm. From the impact on your daughter, then it's just a very simple and easy conversation with her to explain exactly what you just explained to me. You say, hey, honey, when I'm at work, Dad's job is to make sure I look after myself and I'm safe and I chase the bad guys. So when you scare me, it actually hits my reaction or has what I feel at work. It just reminds me of that, so I get a bit more scared. So if I react to you poorly or I get angry or whatever language you would use with her, if I get cross with you, honey, don't think it's about you. It's just because I'm a cop and that's how I am. And I've had those chats with my daughters 16 years post the police. And I'll say to you, I get a bit cross about this, or this is why I do that, and we have a code that we use. We can talk about it a bit later. And it's great because then they understand it's not about them. So she will continue to scare you because that's what your 10-year-old daughter, she'll actually probably think it's funnier.
Yeah.
But then the emotional impact of you, if you lose your mind or you get angry or whatever you do or you overreact, won't bother her. So therefore then the situation's not a problem. Mm-hmm. So the hypervigilance itself is no issue. It's how we handle and explain it that is the issue. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. How we handle it. I mean, that's something that we don't get taught, and then we end up needing it 10, 15 years into our career from people who've had to walk that path like you are now. So, for people who haven't or are, we had a lot of people who are new to the job or are trying to get into law enforcement here, but also, probably 5 to 10 years on. What are some of those warning signs that people need to be aware of that should be sending off little alarm bells in their head that they need to pay more attention?
Yeah, definitely. Mate, it's the thing to me that really comes through on the hypervigilance and hyper-awareness is often it can be anger reactions and withdrawal, can be all of those sort of things. So you can, the simplicity of your own personality changing, all those things that will happen. We all know that the job will change us. You can't join the job and be a police officer and not have it affect you. A lot of it will be positive, some will be negative. The hypervigilance stuff, and that is very much that overreaction to noises and loud noises and sudden movement, what I call an overdeveloped startle response. So our normal startle response in a fight or flight sense in our physiology is if I walk out of a cave and there's a saber-toothed tiger, it tries to attack me, I fight or I flight. Now, this is the same thing, but if you're having that response to minor things, and I noticed for myself, I did in hindsight at the time I didn't see it, if you have what we call shopping trolleys, you call shopping carts, if you're at a supermarket and there's a whole line of shopping carts slamming into the wall, which is a fairly normal occurrence, and you have an overdeveloped startle response of that, then be aware. If you turn and look, that's great. If you jump 3 feet in the air and do some sort of ninja backflip and hide behind the nearest car, that's not great. Then you've got to look and think it's probably having more of an effect. But that on the hypervigilance and hyper-awareness thing is probably the simplest way to understand it is just look at your reaction as an external person would, as silly as that sounds, and ask yourself, is it a reasonable reaction considering who you are and what you do? And that will be different to a normal person's reaction.
That's interesting. Why do you? I mean, can you? I'm personally curious about that one.
Sure.
Kind of going to the story I just told, but also I catch that sometimes a car door slam.
Yes.
And that flinch. What is it? Just that we are so keyed up all the time, and we're not decompressing well.
Absolutely, 100%. So for me these days, part of it's look. I think if you're a good police officer, it's an ingrained behaviour. For me now, I've been out of the police a long time, and I still have that ingrained behaviour. I more recently, since I've been doing a lot of these talks, I've been doing a bit of PT with some of our SWAT guys here. We call them Special Emergency Response Team. That's our SWAT team. And just near where I live, there's 130 stairs, and we'll go and run 10 sets of stairs or 12 sets of stairs together. And most of them are a lot younger and a lot fitter than I am. we'll finish doing that, be sit, have a coffee, and just be talking, telling more stories about the job or talking about whatever. And there'll be a loud noise or something happens, and there'll be 4 or 5 of us, and all of our heads will spin at the same time. And it's like meerkats. Like, it's quite a funny. It looks like a group of meerkats looking around. And I observe their behaviour, and they're very highly trained, very professional, great young guys, and they'll all turn the same way. But I think because of their level of training as a special weapons team, there's an element of calm around it. So it's not the frightened response. Theirs is very much a trained response, treating themselves as professional warriors. Mm-hmm. And when I look at them, they carry themselves with confidence and everything I would love every other police officer to do. And I think you guys in the States probably do it even more professionally than we do here in Australia. And I'll clarify that to say, you guys for decades have been treating yourselves as fairly serious professionals. We've had a bit of an Australian whatever attitude, and in the last decade or 15 years, it's become a lot better, where our guys are tooled up far better now and are starting, we have M4s in cars and there's different things that we've never had before. So that professional warrior stance, which is very much a US law enforcement term, has then turned very quickly but calmly. If it's scaring you, then I think you have an issue. Mm-hmm. So if you hear this car door slam and you're like, oh shit, and you're actually frightened, then the hypervigilance is taking over. If you hear it slam and you turn, and as you know, if it's active offender, if it's CQBs like close quarters battle, if it's any of those things, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. So when something happens on the job, we don't tend to panic. Well, that's certainly not the optimal outcome. If you're having a mini panic, then you need to look and go, hang on, I need to do some things that we're going to talk about later, sleep, meditation, that everyone should do anyway. I need to really up that, or maybe it's time for me to get some external help to assess whether I am having a critical stress overload response, so that you know that you're getting to the frog in the boiling water point. Mm-hmm. If it's merely the door slams and you turn quickly, but you're under control to go, what's that threat, and assess it, and you don't have a high physiology change in heart rate, adrenal response, respiration rate, if those things don't go through the roof, then you're good.
What are some of the early warning signs that either you experienced or that you've studied and you've now seen in your classes for the guys and girls men and women who are beginning to go get a couple of years into this job?
Yeah, definitely, mate. I'm happy with guys and girls. I think I like that term better. But when you look at any of the men and women in law enforcement at any age, in any length of service, there's things like, normally to me it's an anger reaction. That's very simply the thing that I see most often that impacts us. And what I find in that is we become far more angry in traffic with our spouse or partner, our children, other jobs. And jobs are a really good way to see it. When you start going to jobs that when you first joined the police you saw a real importance in, you're now getting to a point where you're like, I'm sick to death of going to another XYZ. It might be to deliver a death message, right? Which obviously is something that no police officer enjoys, I would suggest, but is extremely impactful for the individual that you're going to deliver that message to.
Sure. Yeah.
May well be the only time they ever interact with a police officer in their life. It's one of the most traumatic times of their life. So when you're going to attend a death message, the term we use, if you've got the shits, if you're angry, going, I'm sick to death of death messages, then you need to be looking and going, well, you're becoming jaded and overwhelmed and potentially burnt out, because that needs to be something that none of us relish the call that comes over the radio, said attend this address and deliver this death message. But you need to understand that in your professional law enforcement capacity at that period, you need to be delivering your absolute best to that. If that's annoying you or pissing you off, then you need to start looking at, wow, why does that have that effect on me? If you are, in a very normal sense, for instance, with your daughter, go back to your daughter frightening you. If your daughter's frightening you and you are losing your mind, and as much as I love my dad, him and I have had a lot of these talks about this stuff. Mm-hmm. In my presentations, I use this example where, and he was in one of them that I gave, that example of him coming home and us scaring him, and he jumped about 3 feet in the air, turned around and just really was like, what the F are you doing? And like really lost his temper. And then I start crying. As an 8-year-old child, I worship him. I don't want to upset him. He doubles down and gets even angrier. Mum comes out on the porch of our house and starts yelling at him for yelling at me, and World War III erupts. If that's occurring in your life very reasonably regularly, then you need to know that this critical stress stuff is affecting you. If you find that everybody in your life just becomes an asshole, but you're okay, then potentially this stuff is affecting you because you're the common denominator. If you are driving in traffic and you want to drag everybody out by their hair and punch them in the face for their driving ability, then potentially this stuff is affecting you because you will find not a lot of people around you change. I find these days, because I have a really good handle on my I don't have PTSD anymore. I absolutely believe I've cured PTSD, and the new research coming out is that's absolutely possible, which is fantastic. Mm-hmm. So, but I do still have an Irish temper. I am still a very passionate person. So I do realise that there's a very real possibility if somebody cuts me off in the traffic and I want to get out of my car and drag them out of theirs, which I don't do, there's other things in my life impacting me. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you, I think I might have told this story on the last interview we did, but I'll just tell it very quickly because this is very, I find impactful, and police refer to this to me a lot. They go, that made sense to me. Many years ago now, in the late 2000s when I was still in the job, I knew things were going bad. I knew I was getting angry. I didn't know it was PTSD and depression, but I knew I was in a bad place. And my ex-wife and I went to a supermarket one day, and we were walking into the supermarket. I was pretty angry or frustrated already because I didn't want to go. I hated being where groups of people were. She thought it was best I went. We had one of our normal discussions, hence why she's my ex-wife, as to what we should and shouldn't do. When I got there, I was already pretty wound up, pretty angry, and which was just my normal. Walking through the aisles, there was a guy there who looked to me like an outlaw motorcycle gang member. He didn't have colours, didn't have a strip on, but was just a very grubby-looking individual covered in tattoos, which those days was a rare thing. I've got a number of tats now myself, so I probably look like him. But as I'm walking in the aisle, he's just got that attitude of a real bully. He's in the other end of the aisle, 2 or 3 women in the aisle, and as my wife and I, ex-wife, walking towards him, he just has that real attitude of, get out of my way. And a number of these women move, and he seemed quite proud of his behaviour. I determined he's a bully, and as every police officer listening to this, or person who would like to be a police officer knows, that's the biggest hatred that we have is for bullies in society. We walk past each other. I'm doing my best impression. We have an animal here called a free lizard in Australia that puffs itself up to look big to scare predators. I'm doing that, trying to look as massive as I can. He does the same thing. We've given each other the death stare as we walk past. That happens 2 or 3 times. As it happens, the first time my ex-wife says to me, like, why do you have to start trouble? I said, I'm not starting it. I said, he started it, but I'll certainly finish it. So we go through the aisles. We end up walking into the cereal aisle on our own. My ex-wife went on her own to another aisle. He came in on his own. There's no one else in it. And I think, well, here we are. Here's the showdown. Some music from a Western start playing in the back of my mind. As I walk down the aisle, I walk into the middle of it, so he has to either blade himself and back off and be a coward, or we end up fighting. He gets to me, blades himself. I have massive relief because I'm not that good at fighting. And as he walks past it, he looks me in the eye and goes, what are you looking at, C-word? I don't say a word. I grab him by the throat, slam him into the shelves where the cereal boxes are, and I have him up under the throat. I'm trying to choke him with one hand. Well, I am choking him with one hand. And I'm having a conversation with him about his attitude, how I'll tear his throat out, and all these sort of angry responses. He immediately loses his willingness to fight. I put him down, and he's, I'm sorry, sir, and he's going from a guy who's bullying. Literally, women are moving out of his way because he's walking at them. And 3 or 4 times we've crossed paths, he thinks he's a hero. And then when I actually pull him on and challenge him, he backs off into a coward. So then I become extremely tough because I think, well, he's not going to fight now. So I'm sorry, sir, and I said, get out of here. And he goes, I'm sorry, sir, and he starts walking away, and I say, you better fucking run. So he sprints down the aisle, through the checkout, through the door, out in the street. I think we've chalked one up for the good guys. I pick up my cereal box, go back to my ex-wife, and I'm normal again. My adrenal response was so quick that it was back to normal. And if I was at 90% normally in those days, I'd probably operate at 20% now. So my 90 to 100 wasn't a big jump. I then go back to all of my friends in the canine unit, and they were all crazy lunatics as well. And I said to them, you won't believe what happened. I went to this guy, blah, 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 told them the story. They're like, good, that's exactly what we should be doing. Let's not let him dominate us. So then to me, mate, that reaction now, 20 years later, I haven't been in a fight in a supermarket in 20 years. It's amazing. And the funny part for me is I didn't see that as an over-the-top reaction. And there'll be many police officers, probably you, probably your people who are listening to, going, yeah, well, that makes sense to me. I don't see a lot wrong with that.
Right.
But for a normal member of society, grabbing someone by the throat who's got a bad attitude in essence, in all reality, is an over-the-top reaction. I still think it's not a bad thing, because maybe the next time that guy is walking through thinking he's going to dominate, women and children, he might think twice, because there is a guy who might be capable of grabbing him by the throat again. Maybe he was just an angry individual with his own stuff going on, because that's what I was. That's a really good thing to understand, that this job is having an effect.
Hi, my name is Kit Dump, and I am the Sales and Marketing Director for Hardhead Veterans. Hardhead Veterans believes that police should have the best equipment available to them. That's why Hardhead Veterans exists. I come from a military family. As far as I can think back, that was what was going to happen. When I first got into the military, when I first checked into my first team, we were issued what was called the Mitch helmet, a mid-ear type cut helmet. We wore those things for every operation, every mission. Helmets at that time were around $1,500 for a decent quality, high-cut ballistic helmet that worked well with everything you'd want it to do. With helmets, a lot of people see the resistance to penetration test as the end-all be-all, and our helmets certainly pass that test for level 3A, but there's a whole nother level of tests. Publish that data directly on our website, and you can actually compare apples to apples there and see what helmets are performing at and the actual lab data there. There are quite a few companies now that have come out and are selling very similar helmets that do not meet the full battery of tests. Departments would love to outfit all their guys with helmets. That's really out of the question for most departments. The reaction has been amazing. Go look at our reviews on Facebook or Google. I'm Kit Dump, and our mission is to help you guys stay safe.
You say it. I like how you say it too. That critical stress and PTS are mental injuries, not a mental illness.
Absolutely.
Explain the difference between how you perceive it as a mental injury versus what often people think of it as a mental illness.
Yeah, sure, Garrett. I think this is critical to helping police identify with these injuries and have us reach out and get help. Because the very reason we don't get help, reason I didn't get help, was I didn't realise that it was a mental injury. I didn't realise what it was. These days, I think there's so much information and education out there. There's so many of these conversations being had. I'd say through your agencies and the law enforcement community in the States, very similarly, it's becoming a hot topic. I follow a lot of social media from different things in the States. I'm an ambassador for law enforcement today over there. Now I'm the Australian ambassador for those guys. Seems to me we're talking about it a lot more, which is great. But the very thing that stops us asking for help is the stigma that you mentioned earlier. And the stigma to me comes back to mental health has always had a stigma of there's something wrong with you, you're broken, there's an illness. So you've been infected with an illness, if you like, of mental health. Mm-hmm. Now, mental injury, to me, is what occurs for police officers, military corrections officers, paramedics, firefighters, because it's a result of the job you do, you end up having an adverse reaction. So your guys would have heard this 1,000 times. If you were shot or broke your leg or you're in a bad car wreck, then that injury, you wouldn't be ashamed of it. In many ways, you'll probably be proud of it. And you will have people turn up on your hospital bed. If you've been shot, the chief of your agency will turn up. Your captains, the other cops will be there. There'll be candlelight vigils. People will raise money for you. Right. They will look after your family. We do shootings and death and physical injury brilliantly. Outside of military, I don't think there's anyone that does death or serious injury more effectively or more beautifully or with more pomp and ceremony in a positive sense than police. We do not do the same thing for mental injury. Mental injury is exactly the same. If you and I go to a dark building and we're clearing that building for an armed offender, and I get shot, then the world stops. We mobilise every possible police officer we can, every resource we have, every piece of apparatus we have to look after me and solve that situation. If you and I are going through that very same building, we turn a corner and someone fires a shot at us, misses me, and we take that person out and the situation's resolved peacefully or he dies, then that very same circumstance, the difference is the bullet didn't hit me, the bullet went past me, but the very same mental impact happens that, obviously not the same as if I was shot, that's a bit melodramatic, but you get my point.
Sure, yeah. Mm-hmm.
We don't do anything. Then it will be rare if you and I even have a conversation to go, oh wow, that really shook me up, or I'm not sleeping well, or that's really affected me. We bury it. And if we do identify, there is still absolutely a stigma that runs underneath all of that. That's like, well, you're weak, or harden up, or you'll be fine. Mm-hmm. Because for a number of reasons, you don't want to admit that it's affected you the same way it affected me, because we're tough guys. We're alpha personalities, alpha men and women in this job. The department doesn't want to admit that it's affected you because that has all sorts of duty of care and litigious outcomes and different things for them. I don't want to say it affected me because I don't want to be weak. So therefore, the injury part of that is very real, because the very thing that's happened to you is you've had, the adrenal response, the mental impact, all those things that have occurred for many years. We used to be called battle fatigue 2,000 years ago.
Yeah. So
the Romans in Colosseums had the same thing, but it was called battle fatigue. It's an injury that physiologically occurs to you through a chemical imbalance around your serotonin and dopamine and other things, because of the way it's regulated through the amygdala in your brain, to create an injury to stop you getting in that situation again to become re-injured. And this is the part that we don't really understand, or we don't talk about. When you have a mental injury, like PTSD, like the critical stress reaction, it's actually your body and your brain's way of stopping you going back to work because you're so badly injured. To me, it's a red flag to go, hey, now you really got to do something about this. Do it. But unfortunately, we don't look at it like that. Somebody said to me the other day, and it sounds very self-serving for me, but somebody, a very good friend of mine who's an ex-federal agent here, who has been through PTSD, when the Bali bombings occurred 10 or 11 years ago, he was one of the first on scene for victim identification. He's done some significant work around the world. Him and another very good friend of mine who's still a serving detective have started a mental health charity in Australia who does some great work called Blue Hope. I went down to help them at their office the other day with some things, and he said to me, we were talking about this, and he said, you know what? He said, cowards don't get PTSD. And I went, wow. I said, that actually makes sense to me. And sounds self-serving to me, but normally people who end up with these pretty significant mental injuries are police officers who've really worked hard and done some significant things, and the job was really important to them. Mm-hmm. The guys and we do have guys in every department and girls who avoid work, do the bare minimum, just join because it has, reasonable benefits and job security. They don't often end up too affected because they do the bare minimum. I would suggest, Garrett, a guy like you and the people listening to you, you spend your time outside of the job, putting your heart and soul into educating police. Your TED Talk, we talked about it before, and I acknowledge the amazing impact you have on police officers. You are somebody who doesn't back off going to, if there's a call that you're not specifically tasked to, where you can add some value, you don't drive past it and go and get a coffee, right?
No, yeah, sure.
You go. Mm-hmm. I went to everything I could go to. I would drive across the city that I live in with 2 million people in it. I would drive from one side to the other, your code 3, our code 2 or code 1, lights and sirens, to be the fifth car there just in case there was something I could do. That's the sort of personalities we are. Then you are going to be at a higher risk of that injury because of the person you are. Mm-hmm. That is a culmination of working so hard, you become injured. You're not running down the street with your underpants on your head, throwing your feces at people like so many of the mental health calls we go to, right? That's why we don't identify with it. because
Right.
we don't want to be put in that bracket.
It makes perfect sense. And frankly, I've had police psychologists on. I've had lots of people on, and I don't think anyone's ever framed it as an injury. I guess the closest I've gotten is Josh Montz, who was a major in the Army who was shot. He was shot and killed.
Brilliant.
Yeah, he talks about moral injury. But the idea that it makes sense when you frame it that way, because if you sprain your ankle, your body is hurting at your ankle, telling you that something's wrong, and it's causing you to limp, which is causing you to baby it, which is causing you to slow down and not put extra stress on it so that it can prepare itself. And to the idea that the mind is the same way, it's protecting you and telling you that something's wrong, and it's trying to prevent you from exacerbating that injury. I think that'll help a lot of people reframe this idea that it's a mental injury, and injuries can be repaired. Yeah, like, as you said, our body is amazingly durable, and it can repair itself. And this idea of an illness we often think about as terminal, and I agree. I think you can clear. I think you can cure PTS. I think there's plenty of examples of people out there who've done it, or at least have managed it to the point where it's no longer at the forefront like that. And
but also something.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Just let me clear that, because I'm really passionate about this now. The you say PTSD, post-traumatic stress. You say PTS. I still say PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And the reason I say disorder, and it sounds a little bit flippant, but I don't mean it's a mental disorder, but it throws your life into disorder. And that's something that I like to sort of still have for people to even re-identify the way they think about it.
Interesting.
For me, the other part, two things I want to really, really be clear on. PTSD is a very small percentage of what I'm talking about. I would love if we could actually rid the world of post-traumatic stress disorder as a diagnosis, because I think that is something that is so broad-ranging and far-reaching that it is police officers and military people who are involved in combat or something serious, or in police in shootings or violence or whatever. I deal with a lot of military guys. I've actually I've started with 3 other people. I'm on the board of a children's charity for disabled kids over here, doing some exercises of mental health stuff for parents. One of the guys that's involved in that with me is an ex-SAS, so like our SEALs, an SAS operator. And him and I have had these discussions, right? And he totally agrees that the post-traumatic stress disorder thing, it covers people who've been in bad car wrecks, to people who are victims of sexual assault, through to people who, like us, do our job, or military. Critical stress is what we encounter. And that's what I'm talking about, is critical stress. The PTSD is a label that, unfortunately, medical professionals for many years have told police officers and military and first responders you can never get over it. Have told them that it's a lifelong affliction. Have told them that you can only ever manage it with medication. All of that is absolute bullshit. All of that is absolutely untrue. And I'm living proof it's untrue, because I've come through it, and only because of my pig-headed nature did I refuse to live from 31 or 32 for the next 60 or 70 years of my life with post-traumatic stress disorder. I just absolutely refused to do it. Lately, I was at a function around mental health where I was talking to 2 professors. One was a professor of epidemiology. The other one was a professor whose job at one of the major universities here is to study the impact of critical stress on paramedics. I asked both of those women, I said, what's your belief around post-traumatic stress disorder? Can it be cured? And they both unequivocally said yes. One of them was like, fuck yes, it can. She was so passionate. And I said, why do you believe that? And it's all around neuroplasticity. It's all around new neural pathways. There's a whole lot of neuroscience behind it that I've geeked out on that proves you can. So then I look at it and go, cool. So if it's critical stress injury, you get it, you can actually recover from it, no doubt. But there's a new term that's coming out more recently, and you guys probably have heard it, called post-traumatic growth. Have you heard that, Joe?
I haven't, no.
Cool. So post-traumatic growth is something that's being talked about a lot in this field more recently. And the thing about post-traumatic growth I love, and this is my very layman explanation, post-traumatic growth is something that comes to you, and there's an ability that you get out of a post-traumatic incident. So when I look at my journey, and I'm not a huge fan of that word, but it's my journey out of PTSD, depression, suicide. And when I talk about the suicide stuff I didn't say before, I lay in bed 3 nights in a row with a Glock in my hand. I stood on the outside of a 24th or 26th floor balcony, I can't remember which one, at a party going to jump for 20 minutes. For a number of years in the police, I was certainly looking for incidents to go where I wasn't worried if I got killed. I became quite self-destructive. It made me a good cop in the sense of I would go into dangerous situations and resolve them that other people were probably hesitant to. I think it also made me a dangerous cop. The advantage for me was I didn't have a partner. My partner was a canine, so no other human being's life was put at risk. It was only mine and my dog. But still, that was really unhealthy. But because I hit such a level of rock bottom in the post-traumatic incident or stress, then I had nowhere to go but up. And because of the bounce out of the darkness for me, and because of the bounce out of the trauma that I actually embraced with so many alternate health, alternate medical professionals, hippie, teachers, kinesiologists, hypnotherapists, you name it, I've done it. Sitting in rooms with 300 people, there's a education thing out of the States called Landmark Education. I went and did that. I did so many things that I hated. But I did that because I was in such a dark place and such a bad place. I knew if I didn't do something significantly different, it wouldn't change. What that gave me was a whole lot of post-traumatic growth. And I'm still riding the wave of post-traumatic growth because the motivator and driver behind it for me was to get out of that really dark place. The really positive outcome for it now is my obsessive personality is 100% focused on personal growth and delivering this message to other people. So I grow every day and get better every day. I'm far happier, far more mentally capable and far more emotionally aware and connected than I've ever been in my life pre this. Mm-hmm. So it's actually been a really positive thing for me, and that's what post-traumatic growth is. And that's a choice. So if your guys who are listening who do struggle with critical stress, PTSD, whatever, if they choose to use it as, you know what, this is a really good thing because, again, if your ankle is rolled, that identifies to you that there's some sort of structural problem with your posture, the way you operate, where you're load-bearing, vest, dumbbell, whatever rides. You need to perhaps do some stretching, some strengthening through your posterior chain, whatever it might be. When you hit a post-traumatic stress incident, critical stress incident, same thing. It's identifying a weakness or a vulnerability or a susceptibility that if you focus in on that and actually do the prehab work you can do to prevent that, you come out stronger. That's what post-traumatic growth is.
Oh, I like the term. And it makes sense, too, that it's all. I mean, if you approach it with the right attitude of growth, then you'll grow from it. One thing I think is important for people to understand, too, cops, this will come as no surprise to anyone who's been on for any amount of time, but cops, we can be pretty hard on each other. We can be pretty judgy, and we can be pretty, we can snicker behind someone's back. And I think what I see a lot is people making judgments about how an event affected somebody in a greater way than it did themselves, or they point out how someone's dealing with a problem and is struggling with it much more than the average. Why yes. Run through some of those reasons why these things affect us differently.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing that for me, one of the things I really understand, and I these days get pretty passionate about in a not an aggressive sense, but I'm so focused on it, is this job affects everybody differently for a number of reasons. There are simple things like some of us have a predisposition. So I look at my family, we're Irish Catholics. My grandmother was given up to the Catholic convent when she was 3 years of age, was raised by nuns because she was born out of wedlock in the 1920s, and her mother couldn't afford to raise her. My grandfather went to World War II in Papua New Guinea for 5 years, came back an alcoholic, and obviously fairly badly affected through PTSD and critical stress, but it wasn't diagnosed as that as those days. He just presented as a very shut-off and fairly angry individual. My dad has 15 siblings, 11 of those natural, 4 are adopted or fostered because of my grandmother's experience. They are all amazing human beings who do so much social justice work. They're all involved, either police officers, counsellors, lawyers, which we could argue they don't do a lot of good, but there is a need for them, I guess. There's all these people in our family who are very much focused in on that social justice part. And that is as a result of the susceptibility to this sort of injury and thing that gets passed to them, then it gets passed to me. I believe that because I'm a very emotionally connected person and I love the job and I love helping people, that made me more susceptible. There's a thing called epidemiology that I've looked at recently, and so when you talk of epigenetics, your genetics are your DNA. Epigenetics is what's passed from generation to generation on top of your DNA. So from a mental health perspective, there's epigenetic links to mental health predisposition. So if your guys are looking around and going, hey, my brother has depression or my mum suffered with postpartum depression or whatever, something along those lines, then be aware that maybe you might be more affected. Exactly the same way as if there is a cancer in your family, you'll be more vigilant around, if you're a male and there's prostate cancer, you'll be more vigilant around that. If you're a female and there's breast cancer, you'll be more vigilant around that. If you have a history of diabetes in your family, then you'll be more vigilant around diabetes. There is a scientific medical predisposition to some people. Then the other things, mate, that are even more understandable is relatability of a job. You've got a 10-year-old daughter, so do I. My 10-year-old daughter has sandy brown hair, she's Caucasian, and she's a slight build. If I attend an incident where there is a victim or somebody impacted by that incident who reminds me of my daughter, then there's a very real chance that will have more of an impact on me than another officer who doesn't have children or doesn't have a daughter that will remind them of. Sure. So if you have a 17-year-old son who has 12 piercings in his face and 1,000 tattoos, that you're not going to relate to him to that 10-year-old girl, right?
Right.
That makes sense. And that's down to the simplicity of if you go to a domestic violence incident and there's a 10-year-old child sitting in the corner crying, you will subconsciously relate to her emotionally more so than if it wasn't someone you can relate to. And then the third part of it, to me, is very much about police have a limited resilience and a limited ability to deal with the crap that we see. And it's that bucket that we carry around inside us that the normal things from life fill up with. So if you can actually think of a bucket that you carry with you, and it sounds silly, but every time something in normal life happens in a stress response, you put that crap in there. Mm-hmm. As you go into policing, then you put that in on top. Suicide in Australia, and I'm sure the stats will be no different, kills double the amount of people as the road toll. So twice as many people die through suicide as they do through motor vehicle accidents.
Yep.
Similar for you guys.
Mm-hmm.
That means out there in general society, the biggest killer of people between 15 and 24 in Australia is suicide. The states will be similar. So that's the largest cause of death in that group of people. And obviously because they're young, you don't have disease and other things. When you look at that, so people out there are super stressed and their buckets are full. We put policing on top of it and then wonder why it affects cops. So it has an accumulative effect where it just keeps going. And when you get to the point where your bucket's overflowing, that's when it starts to impact your life. So those three reasons are why the job will impact different people. There is a very small percentage of people, and I love to make up stats, I'd say it's 3%, I just made that up, 3% of people in the world who are sociopaths. There will be 3% of police officers who are sociopaths. So there will be some police officers, some of us have met them, some of us have worked with them, who just will not be affected by things because that's not their genetic makeup. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, they're just not as emotionally impacted. I would again suggest for people like you and I, Garrett, who are so passionate about helping others to the point where you will do what you do with your podcast and all the other work you do, I do what I do, I'm a higher chance, and I won't speak for you, but I'm certainly was a higher chance when I look in hindsight. I wanted to go to every incident I could to help as many people as I could, and I was very emotionally invested in the victims of the crimes that I attended to. So therefore, my bucket was going to fill up quicker. Those things just make perfect sense to me.
Oh yeah, I totally agree, and I've found, I mean, as I've gone on through the career, and I think the podcast, the whole reason this podcast started was because I was trying to seek out some answers to some of the things that I was feeling, right? Yeah. Or physically or emotionally or mentally, and that other people were having as well. And a lot of that I learned through this process and through reaching out to people was that it was, this, on the surface, this podcast started as a health and fitness podcast, right? How do I was out of shape, I was overweight, and I wanted to get back into shape and fitness to be the tactical athlete that I think we need to be, right? And so, ostensibly, this whole thing started because of that. But then, as I dug deeper and like peeled that onion, or opened that can of worms, or opened that Pandora's box, began to put these things together and understand that it is all related, and my personally, my weight and all that had a lot to do with not managing that stress well, and not having and Kevin Gilmartin talks about this in his book, about how we go from a guy who called the Eustas, right? I used to go mountain biking. I used to play tennis. I used to go to the beach. I used to go surfing. And as kids come into the picture, and as we get older and time becomes more and more restricted, those things go by the wayside. And we used to surf. We used to mountain bike. We used to do these things that we used to off-gas some of that stress, or empty that bucket, to stick with your analogy. And so it caused me to dive deeper into, and why I had police psychologists on the show, and watching some partners struggle through some things, and then I struggled through things too, and I mean, my TED Talk, which you touched on, talks about a very tough time in my career. And something to probably do a whole episode on this whole idea, but I did not experience the worst of it by any means. In fact, I had quite the easy assignments during. For people listening, I'm referring to a mudslide debris flow that occurred in my area in January of this year, 2018. That was sent boulders and mud and all this sorts of stuff into town, and killed 23 people, and basically wiped out entire neighborhoods, and pretty treacherous and horrific. And I was actually out of town for the first day of that event. And so, I think about that, and I think that I've come through that particular experience healthy because of my work talking to people like you prior to that event. But I've seen it in other people, and seen the struggle that they're dealing with. We often, I'm going off on a whole tangent here, but we often misunderstand too that I think a lot of cops don't answer up for help because they feel like they don't deserve it. And what I mean by that is I am now closing in on 13 years of full years as a cop, and 6 as a sergeant. And I've never been in a shooting. I've never had to deal. Well, that's not. I would say I never had to deal with a dead kid, but that's not true necessarily. But I have skated on a lot of the quote unquote highly traumatic events that the cops often deal with. I don't know how many times I did my Friday and went on my weekend, and then an hour and a half later, the shift that took over for us got in a shooting, right? Yep. Or it's my day off, or I think 2 or 3 times it's happened where I took a vacation day, and I went off on a vacation or had a day off, and the person filling in for me ended up in a shooting or a car accident during a pursuit or something like that. So not only do I think we end up with some of that guilt, but we end up with this idea that I haven't had anything majorly traumatic in my career, therefore I don't deserve to feel like I need help because there's people out there who had it worse than me.
Absolutely. Definitely. But let me touch on that for a second.
Yeah.
The thing that I say to people about that, and I totally agree, 100% agree. I sat with a police officer earlier this week, and I'll give you some details because I don't think there'll be many people here who will hear this story. And he is an amazing young guy, had some previous service in another sister-type agency to policing, and only has 2 years on the job. And he's struggling. And he's struggling from a particular incident where he ended up in a situation where for 4 hours he was in, and I won't give details for
sure,
what I'm looking for out of respect to him. But he was actually in a situation where he, for 4 hours, was in a particular circumstance where he couldn't do anything for the person who was significantly injured, ended up losing both their legs. He was lying flat next to this person for 4 hours, holding their hand, talking to them, telling them it was going to be okay when he believed that they were going to die. He was in extreme physical danger himself, wouldn't leave the situation because he didn't want the person on their own. And there was him and one paramedic, and the paramedic was getting him, at one point, had to restrain and pin the arm of the victim above their head so he could put an incision into their chest to reinflate the person's lung with no anaesthetic. So pretty horrific stuff, right? Pretty full-on shit. This guy, it wasn't a shooting, it wasn't anything else, it wasn't a typical police thing. In my 13 years of seeking out danger, this sort of thing would happen once in a million years. It's a rare occurrence. Mm-hmm. That guy's really he's badly affected. And his biggest thing for me, that happened in his first year on the job. Oof. What happened is, typical, unfortunately, this is where departments and bosses need to get a lot smarter. He was there for 4 hours. 15 minutes before the guy was extracted from the particular situation, they terminated his duty so he didn't incur overtime. So he also didn't get the finality of getting out, seeing the guy come out, right? Which you laugh, I laugh, because so typical. So typical. But I think that's starting to change. I said to him, and I'm very, very upfront and pretty aggressive with these guys when I talk to them, and I won't give you the language I used, but think of the worst language you can use, and that's how I talk to cops, because that's the only way they listen.
Sure.
And I said to him, listen, mate, you have got to effing understand that you were in a situation then, I don't care if you're on the job 30 years or 3 minutes, that is a job that will absolutely impact anybody significantly. That's why you're in the situation you're in. If you went through that on your first day in the job and the second day in the job you were off on sick leave, everybody would understand. You're the only one who thinks that you're a coward. You're the only one who thinks you're weak. You're the only one who thinks as though it should be a different circumstance. We spent 2 hours together. At the start, he was quite emotional. His wife had reached out to me. She'd seen me talk somewhere and said, I talked to him. She bought my book. He'd read it. He said he's 33 years of age or something. He hadn't read a book since high school, and he read my book in one night. Wow. And he said, because as I read it, I understood just how impactful what you were saying was. He said, I could take your name out and put my name in, how I felt the impact, blah, blah, blah. I said to him, mate, of course that's understandable. The thing that for you in that mudslide, mate, when I heard your TED talk, I in my mind envisaged that scene like something out of a zombie movie. Yeah. Where literally buildings are destroyed, there's mud waist high, it would stink, it would reek, there's an overwhelming fear that every corner you turn, there's dead bodies, serious impacts, all sorts of things. The fact you turned up one day later, the fact that your rhetoric around it is, but I was out of town on the day it happened, so it shouldn't affect me as badly. That sort of stuff is, and with all respect, my friend, is the bullshit that we tell ourselves, right, that has us get really badly hurt. The thing for me, Garrett, if you did nothing else in your police career except one shift doing what you did in that mudslide, I'd be concerned if that didn't have an impact. That would tend to suggest to me that you're a psychopath. Because you can't walk through that zombie environment and not even be impacted.
Right.
And I want your listeners to think this, actually stop and do this exercise in their mind. Think of somebody in your life who's not a police officer. Think of when the last time they experienced a dead body or any violence or anything. And it's probably never. Or if they did, it was an innocuous situation where Auntie Mary was 95, she died in her sleep, and Mum went round to check on her and they found her peacefully lying in bed. The chances are they may have been in a traffic accident. Maybe they've witnessed an assault, but it would be very minor. Then ask yourself, when was the last time they went to a violent domestic where there was, somebody had beaten their wife so badly she was in a coma, or husband? When was the last time they had somebody pull a gun on them? When was the last time they pulled up a car with 3 suspects in it and had to fight for their life at 3 o'clock in the morning, waiting for backup, and it felt like it took 6 hours to get there? When was the last time that they came across an accident scene and had to pick up dead bodies and body parts off the road? Mm-hmm. When was the last time that they had to go into a dark building at 3 in the morning on their own or with one other partner, chasing somebody who had just murdered someone else, who has a propensity to, and a want to, and a probably bloodthirst to kill a cop, and they had to go and face that? One of those incidents would be extremely emotionally and spiritually and mentally impactful on that individual. You do that, every freaking day.
Right.
The guys you're listening to do that every freaking day.
Sure.
You see more in 8 hours than most people see their entire life. And we say that flippantly, and we say that like it's not a thing. That is absolutely the case. Most shifts, you'll do at least one of those things. You know, there's not a shift where you don't have an interaction with a violent individual or potentially violent. There's not one shift where you don't do a vehicle intercept. There's not one shift where you don't go to something like a 911 hang-up call. There goes a 911 hang-up call at this address, go. Now, we get to the point of going, oh, just another shit job. But you go, you know what that might be? That could be, and I'm using terms that I know from media for you guys, that could be 4 MS-13 members locked up in a house somewhere who are calling cops to the front door so they can murder them as a gang initiation. You don't know it's not.
Mm-hmm.
So the sense, and I'm being melodramatic for a reason, because those sort of things have occurred. Cops have been ambushed in jobs that were very innocuous jobs. Look at Houston. You know, there's jobs all over the states.
Right.
So you can go to one of those jobs. I know I've heard you interview one of the guys who were involved in the Las Vegas shooting. One of the guys that was there and I can't remember his name. Excuse my ignorance.
Yeah, Larry Hahn, just as a concert goer.
Yeah, Larry, there as a concert goer. They're watching country music, which obviously, you know, I love both genres of music as he does, country and western. He's there listening to country music and loving it, and then next minute rounds start firing around. He goes into action, puts his life on the line, goes back in to save people because that's who he is. Most people don't. Most people in that situation run. Mm-hmm. We are a special breed of human being as police officers, and I'm so much more comfortable these days. I'm out of the job longer than I was in it. But as I get more involved with police, not one person has ever judged me critically to my face about being a coward with post-traumatic stress or critical stress. Every one of them's embraced me like a brother. Every one of them has been so supportive. And to me, I have come through such a growth in the last 12 months doing these presentations where I feel so much a part of that blue family again, and I love that because they're the people I relate to the best. They're the people I feel the most at home and comfortable with. Mm-hmm. Look at what I've just talked about. Every one of your guys and girls can identify with at least one of those incidents in the last probably 14 days.
Yeah, sure.
So, of course, we're going to be impacted.
It's, you know, and I like, too, how you approach it with, there's an assumption, it's almost an assumption of fact that this is going to affect you. And if we take it and if we take it as that versus like the flu, we try not to get the flu. We take the vaccine to avoid the flu, and we try to avoid the flu. You know, we wash our hands. We do all these things to avoid the flu. We often still get the flu, but this is something that I think is more inevitable, at least in some ways. And what I think one of the things you've done through your presentation is develop, you know, the 5 practical keys to long-term success, which as a police officer. And I think I want to go through those 5 because I think those 5, again, everything's interconnected and it all relates. But then if someone can take these 5, and none of them are going to be a big shock to anyone who's been listening to the show for a long time because they're all the same themes. But walk us through those 5 key practical steps for long-term success.
Yeah, absolutely. So the 5 keys, Garrett, and for your listeners, and you and I have spoken about this and how we practically do it, I'm not sure whether you can attach these to the show notes or we can do something, but we'll give my details at the end and I'll give you guys my email address at the end. If they want, there's the PDF downloads of all this information. I'm happy for them to have it for free. The 5 things for them to deal with for you guys out there is nutrition, sleep, training, mindfulness, and mental rehabilitation. That's how I started out in these PDF notes. What I've actually come to understand even in the last 12 months is sleep is the number 1. I thought nutrition was when I started this. More research to go sleep's number 1. Police officers are horrible at sleep. We do it poorly. It's not really normally that restorative or recuperative because it's too short. If you're not sleeping a minimum of 8 hours a night as a police officer, you are under adrenal fatigue and stress 24/7. The reason that, and you would have had this experience, and a lot of the people listening will, you will work X amount of months straight. You will then go on leave, go on vacation, and get sick. Have you had that experience?
Every time I go on vacation.
Exactly. Because you were operating in such a state of hyperadrenaline fight or flight, you're running in the red line. If you think of a car's tachometer running in the red line, then when you stop, your body has a chance to collapse. If you like, disease takes over, and as in your immune system drops, your resilience to colds, flus, whatever drops, so you get sick. Because we are so resilient and we're so strong-minded and mentally tough that you can push through fatigue and push through the sickness and whatever else. But then when you stop work and actually relax, you fall in a heap.
Yep.
Sleep is that. The reason that happens is because you don't sleep enough. The number one thing is your body does not get the chance to have the restorative and the recuperative rest to re-energize and deal with the physical and physiological parts of the critical stress. You're under extreme adrenal fatigue all the time. So your body is literally churning and burning all the time, and that has an impact on just physically, it impacts you. Then you get down to the mental part where obviously your brain is under extreme fatigue, you don't get a chance to rest, the hypervigilance, hyper-awareness, all the things we talked about. The stress part of this is so closely related to sleep that I cannot stress that enough. The people who I talk to, and I presented to over 100 detectives yesterday, major in where my old department's criminal operations branch, crime, what they call it. So that's homicide squad, sex offenders, armed robbery squad, all the major crime, I guess. The guys in there that when I ask questions were like, yeah, no, I felt it, but it's never really affected me, were the ones who slept well, who ate well. And you know how many there were? 2 out of about 200. But they were very well adjusted, right? You need to be getting 8 hours sleep minimum, and that sleep needs to be really effective. So it needs to be blackout curtains. It needs to be sleep masks. There needs to be no noise, or even a white noise or a background noise, so that it helps, wash out the external noise, if you like. It's difficult. When you've got kids, your 10-year-old daughter doesn't really understand that dad's been on night shift, so she needs to be quiet during the day, right?
No, she doesn't. We've had that conversation.
Exactly. And the other part is we don't want to have our family adjust their behaviour because we need to sleep.
Right.
I remember as a kid when my dad was on night, when my mum and dad divorced when I was 12, but when my dad was on night shift, and he worked a lot of night shift because that's where the fun stuff happened, my sister and I would creep around the house. Mum would be honest, going, "Shh, your dad's sleeping." And I used to get really cranky and think, well, why is that my problem? So we'd disappear on our bikes for the whole day and come home and dad would be awake. But you need to be really militant with sleep because that is so impactful. And think of it like this. When you look at the Guantanamo Bay detainees, there was more effective result gained out of sleep deprivation than there was out of waterboarding. So, and I've heard a number of people talk about this and looked at a lot of the science and talked to people about it. And I use the Guantanamo Bay just because it's a very easily recognisable circumstance. But the research shows that when somebody who gets waterboarded, so literally is drowning, sitting in a chair, lack of sleep has them more willing to give up information. So you think yourself, and I used this example yesterday, I haven't used it before, and there were so many people responded positively. I want your guys to get this. When you are so tired, when you have literally been working for 24 hours straight, or you've done 2 or 3 what we call quick shifts, where there's only an 8-hour break in the middle, or whatever it is, you have had such a limited amount of sleep for 2 or 3 days, you are so tired that you can literally just about feel the cold pillow on your face as you're lying down to go to sleep. Have you had that experience?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right. So when you're at that point of fatigue where you are like, I would give anything just to sleep, and there's no way we were 72 hours without sleep at that point because you would shut down. That is so impactful on us because of if you're not getting 8 hours sleep, and I believe cops should get more, but I'm not an idiot. If I said 10 hours, nobody would even try. But if you're not getting 8 hours sleep, then what do you suppose we're using to operate? What would you guess?
All those adrenal chemicals that we're pumping out.
100% adrenaline. So you not only have heaps of adrenal fatigue and adrenaline overload because of the incidents we see, Then you're not sleeping enough, so you're in adrenal fatigue and your body's operating on adrenaline. Then we go to the next one, which is nutrition. So I say to people, like, whoever eats food in a packet, and they look at me like I'm an idiot, and I laugh and I go, so who doesn't? We all eat processed foods in a packet. Any food that's processed is essentially a chemical shitstorm. There's very little nutritional value.
Yeah.
But we eat it because it's fast, it's convenient, we don't have time, etc. I don't want to spend heaps of time on this stuff, but what it means is it's sugar and chemicals. Sugar has the same addictive quality in our brain as dopamine, as heroin and cocaine. It hits the same receptors in our brain that produce dopamine and serotonin, hence the reason it's so addictive. Sugar is 7 to 9 times more addictive than cocaine or heroin. That's what we live on. Red Bulls, coffee, food, chocolate bars, whatever it is to get that boost of energy through nutrition. Mm-hmm. The problem is it's like throwing petrol on a fire. There's a big bang and a lot of light and a lot of heat, then it's out. Same thing. Our bodies are built 50,000 years ago. The mechanical system that we use for digestion and food, our physiology, is 50,000 years old. Well, there was no McDonald's 50,000 years ago. There were no chocolate bars. There was no Red Bull. We used to eat meat, vegetables, and fruit. That's what we need to be eating. And then when I ask cops that, they look at me like I've got two heads, and they go, well, we can't. There's no convenience. And I said, well, you know what? I don't know whether it's the same in the States. I'm sure it is. McDonald's here have chicken salad. You know, you can go and get chicken salad at McDonald's. Do you guys have that?
Yeah, they have some quote-unquote healthier options.
Healthier options, right?
Yeah.
They still don't taste fantastic. The burgers taste better because there's more chemical and sugars in them, so they hit the receptors, so we feel a bigger boost.
Right.
But if you eat that chicken and salad, or you do meal prep, or you take tins of tuna with, some other salad or something else that you eat on the job instead. If you eat 3 tins of tuna and a banana for your meal break, that's a whole lot healthier than eating a burger.
Sure.
And it's not that hard to do. That means then that your body has the fuel. If you eat the wrong nutrition, if you have the wrong food, then guess what your body uses to compensate? Adrenaline. Same thing. And then, mate, we go to training, and I won't use this a lot because I've heard you guys talk about this, the warrior athlete, and I couldn't agree more. Your offenders are training now. Your suspects are training now. Why aren't you? It has a huge stress relief because when you train, it dumps serotonin and dopamine. They're the feel-good drugs that counteract the adrenaline, and your adrenaline literally gets burned up by training. I went and did 10 sets of the 130 stairs yesterday. I've had a really hectic 3 weeks. I haven't had a day off. I've been really busy. I didn't feel like it. I hadn't trained for 2 or 3 days, and I could feel myself getting crankier and getting more irritable. Went and trained. Took me 25 minutes, and I felt amazing. It's about just taking ourselves more seriously. You can train at the start or the end of your shift now, and I know you're a bit of a CrossFit aficionado through Trevor Bone. CrossFit, you can buy a sandbag, you can buy a kettlebell, you can put it in the boot of your patrol car, and you can do it on your meal break in a park. Chances are you're not going to. But you can certainly come home from work and put your headphones in and pick up a sandbag and do a 15-minute workout that you can Google sandbag workout on the internet.
Sure. And
you'll get a fantastic stimulus or response. All of these things are easily dealt with. And then go into one that I know you've talked about before with meditation, because you meditate, right?
Yeah, I do. It's sporadic. It's sporadic, and my practice is subpar. But it's not for lack of belief in it. It's I go back between meditation and journaling, which I find to be essentially two different concepts that achieve the same goal. But in fact, I gave poor guys who have to have me as their supervisor, because I gave a briefing on meditation, a squad briefing on it just this week. Because I have a lot of young guys. I'm like, you're going to get briefings from me that you won't get from other sergeants, and this is one of them.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. But what you're doing, mate, is you're actually essentially setting them up, as you know, and I applaud you for it, because you would always you'll certainly cop a bit of flack from other people about it. There'll be other sergeants who'll be either to your face or behind your back, go, well, what's Garrett doing? Who's he think he is?
Right.
There'll be a whole lot of that sort of gear. But meditation is literally the mechanism to talk us down from the ledge of adrenal fatigue and stress, because it literally slows down the physiological response of stress in your brain. therefore in your body. Your thoughts lead your bodily reaction. If you think stressed, you feel stressed. If you feel stressed, you think more stressed. It's an ever-revolving loop, as you know. Mm-hmm. I'll give you a very quick example. We've got in our special weapons team here at CERT, the guys I sort of train with, one of the guys, him and I, have developed a very strong friendship in the last few months. He was the guy who instigated me going to talk to the guys at CERT. So it was K9 unit, CERT, our riot squad, just a room of alpha males and females. And I was really nervous because that was my old environment. Went back and talked to them, and they were so receptive to what I did. I went back and did a second one a couple of weeks later. He's a guy there now very much looking at things like meditation to bring out their best performance. Mm-hmm. So a lot of their guys are using meditation, and they're actually teaching it to their team, to the 4 different special weapons teams that they have on the roster. They're doing so training to them is very normal. Sleep they're really into. The nutrition they're really getting serious about. They're looking at a lot of these positive personal development, emotional awareness techniques. They're into podcasts for, about positive leadership, mindset, how to go the extra mile, how to get better performance, because they are literally treating themselves like warrior athletes. Now, special weapons teams normally do, but the reality is for those guys, and these guys agree with me when I say this, they normally know what they're going to. So they normally have some idea of what they're attending. They do some first response patrolling here. I know your guys, SWAT guys, do the same. But normally they're either going to a deliberate action, as in they're going to perform a raid or they're going to do something, or they're going to something they understand. Very rarely are they turning up to a situation they don't know anything about it. First response guys are doing that every day. Every job you go to, you don't know anything about. Mm-hmm. So you should be more prepared than the special weapons guys when it comes to this stuff, and meditation is a massive part. My meditation practice is 20 minutes before I go to sleep, no matter when I sleep, and that's a non-negotiable. So it does not matter, and I don't work shift work, so it's a lot easier, I'll grant it. But if I'm going to go to sleep, it's 20 minutes, that's part of my sleep. So every night, if I go to bed at midnight and I have to get up at 4 a.m, I meditate. Because I know it has such a positive effect. And then every morning I wake up, I do 10 to 20 minutes meditation before I get out of bed. And the thing is, if you do it like that, then it's part of your routine. You always sleep, do it before and after, and 10 minutes is enough. Like whatever amount of time you can do, just start doing it. Do it for 21 days. You'll see the difference. It'll do itself. And then the 5th thing is mental rehab. Simple. People listening to this podcast, you're already doing it. It's about immersing yourself in positive personal development around law enforcement, around anything you can find. I go through periods where I geek out on different podcasts, different concepts, videos. When I watch TV at night, I don't watch normal cable or free-to-air rubbish TV because it's mindless. I'll watch YouTube videos. So I'll go and watch Gary Vaynerchuk, or I'll look at Tom Bilyeu from Impact Theory, or I'll go and find David Goggins' videos, or I'll find anybody I can, Dave Grossman. Like, I find people that I know are really good in their field, and I see who they're talking to. Then I go and watch the stuff of the person they talk to. Mm-hmm. Podcast the same, all that, because then that gives me the mental rehab of dealing with stress that I face in what I do. It's nowhere near like law enforcement stress, but you can imagine I speak to probably at least 1 or 2 police officers a day around stress and PTSD and pretty serious stuff. So I'm really mindful of making sure that I'm looking after myself in that, and that I don't get re-injured, and I get more focused and more driven and more happy in it because I love doing it. But those 5 things for your guys is so important. The sleep, nutrition, training, meditation, mental rehab. If you do those 5 things in your life, I will guarantee you are never going to be crippled by critical stress. You will have ups and downs. It will be difficult. You will go through tough times, but your resilience and your ability to deal will be definitely enhanced. And the positive part is, if you do that, you are far less likely of becoming a divorce statistic, an alcoholic statistic, a gambling statistic, all the other things that we self-medicate with to deal with the stress. Mm-hmm. So you can do the work now and inoculate yourself. And if you're 13 years on the job or 30 years on the job, if you start today, that was the second best day to start. Yesterday was the first best. You missed that. Get into it and start moving, and you will just get such positive results. that you might be listening to me and think I'm a bit over the top because I'm so passionate about it, and I get that. But I'm never again going to let an opportunity go past where I can't punch cops in the face and say, do this shit to sort yourself out. Because then if you, Garrett, if you as a guy who I respect very highly end up injured through critical stress because you don't look after yourself, then I can stand with a clear conscience and go, I did the best I could do to try and help you.
Sure. Shaun, that's a great place to end on. Before we do go, though, where can people find out more about you and about the coursework you do and your own work?
Yeah, sure, Matt. So if you just go to thestronglifeproject.com, that's where I am. The Strong Life Project on Instagram, Facebook, Shaun O'Gorman on LinkedIn. I've got a podcast called the Strong Life Project Podcast. There's 850 daily episodes on that I've done, just on different concepts. And mate, one of the things selfishly, and this is a bit of a reach out to guys that listen to you, I'm really passionate about coming and doing my work in the States because I can see such a need with your guys, and even to be able to come over and get this information started so other people can lead it on. So if anybody wants this information or wants to talk to me or whatever, please email me at Shaun, SHAUN, at thestronglifeproject.com. If I get 300 emails, I'll be wrapped. If you want copies of the PDF download, email that address, I'll send it back to you. Anything I can ever do for any of your guys, reach out to me on social media or on email. I'm getting more and more messages. If it takes me a few days to get back, understand why. But my life's mission now is to help cops deal with the shit you see, because that's my way selfishly of feeling like I'm still contributing to law enforcement and doing my part.
It's great work, and we'll put all those links in the show notes too for everybody, so they can go to the thesquadroom.net and see your episode there and find all those if they're not able to write those down right now. Shaun, thanks for all the work you do. It's amazing to me how this little medium of podcasting, but also social media and how we've been able to connect from across the world from each other, and I've been able to help you share a mission that's important to you, but also very important to me, and how we can literally connect the other opposite sides of the world to show that this is just such a universal issue that we need to be open about. So yes. I thank you for leading the charge on that. I always enjoy talking with you, buddy, and there will be a third one at some point here too.
Brilliant, brother. Look, thank you so much, and to your guys out there, this isn't something we do well in Australia, but thank you all for your service. Garrett, thank you for your service. I think what you guys do is just amazing. Every police officer listening to this, hold your head high. You do one of the two most noble professions on the planet, the other one being military. I think that what you guys do is just I find it, I get quite emotional when I think about it, because the personal sacrifice police officers make is immense. And to you personally, mate, thank you so much for what you do, because I think the way that you spread this message as a current serving police officer is unbelievable. And the more of us that do this, I'm not leading any charge, I'm just part of the team. The more of us that do it, the more we help others. So thank you so much.
I appreciate that. Shaun, thank you for being here.
Thanks, mate.
All right, thanks for listening to the Squad Room. If you like what you heard today, if you got something out of this conversation, please consider leaving a review on iTunes. It helps us spread the word about the show. If you heard something from this show today that a friend or a loved one needs to hear, please tell them about the show. You can go to thesquadroom.net and email this episode directly to someone. This is one of those episodes that I think hopefully is empowering some of you out there to go have hard conversations with your family, if it's about something you're struggling with, or also don't forget about your partners, and maybe going out and having a hard conversation, but a needed conversation with someone you care about, because you see them struggling and they need help and you're not sure what to do. Maybe this podcast, this conversation is the starting point, and it can help someone start to heal that moral injury, or that mental injury that we talked about in the show today. To keep up to date, you can text The Squad Room, all one word, to 44222 to get signed up for our mailing list directly from your phone. And, of course, follow me on Instagram and Twitter at The Squad Room, or join our Facebook group. It's a closed group. Lots of good conversations happening in there. I say closed only because I keep it that way so we can have honest conversations, and everybody in there is vetted to be either in law enforcement or aspiring to be in law enforcement. Also, many of you have asked how you can support the show. Share it with someone else. talk to the sponsors, follow Blue Line Flex, follow Hardhead Veterans. Let them know that you heard about them because of us and because of the show. It's important that people understand the connections, and you can and do that. But share this episode. Share another episode that's a favorite of yours. Grab someone's phone and subscribe to the show. Talk about the show. That's how you guys can support the show and then help keep this moving forward. All right, until next time, take care of each other and stay safe.